Welcome to Skeptarchy. I'm your host, Del on Earth, and with me tonight are...
Kevin Watson.
Eric Standing.
And I'm Corey Johnston.
All right, let's get rolling. You want to start by talking about the debate? We'll go in chronological order with the recent events. I watched
Sounds
it,
fun.
Unfortunately. I regret that decision a lot.
You watched it in its entirety?
I did not make that particular mistake. So, however, I have heard many of the highlights of the night, of which there weren't all that many from what I understand.
They were low lights, Kevin. They were low lights.
Yeah.
They were the low beams, not the high beams.
Mm-hmm.
In this house, there's myself, my husband, and our roommate, Gwen. And Gwen and I are both very interested in politics, and my husband is not that interested in politics, but he was the one who wanted to watch the debate. Like, Gwen and I were like, no, it's gonna be a shit show, please. And he was like, I don't know, I feel like I need to watch it. It's gonna have some implications on tax law. And I was like, all right. I mean, I guess if you want to watch it. It was a bad decision. Did anyone else watch the debate?
I think you might be the only one that watched it in its entirety. I made it to, I think, gonna catch the end, but I just never really revisited that.
Yeah, I definitely stopped paying attention, like somewhere about an hour in, and then started paying attention again towards the end. So, my memory may not be perfect. It was kind of awful. I just felt like Biden was not impressive. Apparently all the polling says that he did really well, but
yeah, which is weird.
I felt like he was not terribly, I don't want to say incoherent, but he was just not, I didn't feel like he was making a point a lot of the time.
I mean, it's one of those situations of he looked smarter by comparison, because as incoherent and evasive of points as Biden can be, Trump is 10 times worse. So my guess is it's just, by comparison, he looked good.
Yeah, I guess. And I did hear some stuff about, key demographics. Like, the way Trump was, so aggressive and obnoxious was particularly bad for, suburban housewives, which are critical for him winning the election. Stuff like that.
It didn't take very long into the debate till I was kind of appalled by, just jumping right on the Pocahontas thing again. I think that was about 5 minutes in. Oh, Pocahontas was here. She would have done even worse. And, I think about 75% of his arguments were, if somebody else was doing it, they would do it a lot worse than what I've done, and it's just totally based on fantasy. And so I found that awkward. And then out came I think it was the China plague not long after. So, I mean, I think it's these little cracks and things that some people try to play off as funny, but are so disrespectful. And humor, you have to draw the line in when it becomes mean like that, because a lot of the early Nazi propaganda was probably considered humorous, right? The caricatures and things like that. So I just really hate to downplay everything that he promoted during his debate. I think it was really serious. It was an absolute eye-opener politically to me. And a call to, that I have to become more active and more aware, I think.
Yeah, so I saw I saw a couple of clips. I saw the bit where Biden did what pretty much everyone I think wishes they could do, which is to tell Trump to shut up to his face. Saw various bits where the moderator was just completely incapable of doing his job at the debate. But other than that, it sounded like nothing really interesting or substantive occurred or was discussed. It was a lot of Trump trying to promote himself and Biden trying to basically tell people why Trump is shit, which I feel like if you don't know already, is not really something that's going to convince you. So
I know,
so for me, oh, go ahead, Corey.
I know, when I was little, the clips I heard, it sounded a lot like Trump just reciting talking points, Fox News talking points over and over again, and Biden saying, well, no, that's not true, and no, that's not true, no, that's not true, and just having to do that over and over again for 2 hours sounds like quite a headache.
Well, they spent so much time where they were all three talking that you literally couldn't understand what anyone was saying. You couldn't understand what anyone was saying. And then the fact that, Trump doesn't speak with nouns and verbs in his sentences. He just sort of word vomits. And Biden is not that much better at having fully formed points. And so combine that with those two talking over top of each other and then sometimes the moderator talking. And it was I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know what anyone's saying.
How is anybody getting any content, any messaging out of this debate, right?
Yeah, Trump did around the time, Eric, that he brought up the Pocahontas slur. He also started to do this really weird thing, like you were saying, Kevin. He just randomly jumped on Biden saying, "You're just like Bernie Sanders. You want everything Bernie Sanders wants. You want Bernie Sanders' communist healthcare plan." And it was just, I laughed out loud because it was it wasn't really related to what they were talking about. It was so ridiculously not true. And Biden was just what? No, that's not what I've been saying at all. And it's how many people wish that Biden wanted Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan?
Yeah, trust me, if Biden actually had gotten on board with Bernie's healthcare plan, he'd be getting an actual vote from me rather than my utter and complete apathy toward him.
Right.
So, that would be nice, but yeah, it sounds to me like it was a case of three ignorant, just completely pointless white men up on stage talking about things that the, majority of Americans who aren't like them, don't actually care about, or if they do, they're not saying anything substantial about it. So,
yeah, the one thing that I do think went well was at the very end when they were sort of making their final points, Biden spoke to the audience directly, specifically about voting, and he made it less about voting for him, and he made it more about the voting rights and the voter suppression thing. And he was they want to take away your voice. Don't let them take away your voice. The American people get to have a say in this. And I do think that was probably a pretty effective speech. I mean, it had to be canned and practiced ahead of time because it was very sort of well thought out, but that's what he finished up on. And I did think that was probably pretty effective because it wasn't about any of their petty bickering. It wasn't even about Trump at all. And it's the kind of stuff that, like I said, the suburban woman vote that Biden needs to win so badly, and that's kind of Trump's to lose, probably ate that up. So.
Yeah, that was probably a good thing. I did hear something about Trump promoting white supremacy, or at least doing a nice little dog whistle. What was the deal with that?
Yeah, well, he said, they asked him to condemn white supremacy, which he refused to do.
Somehow couldn't,
of course.
Somehow couldn't make himself do that.
Yeah. And then
amazing. It's so difficult to say the 4 words, "I condemn white supremacy." How is that? You wouldn't think that would be so difficult to say aloud. But then again, he also wouldn't commit to a peaceful transition of power if he lost the election. So.
Oh, yeah, he did really poorly on that one. When he answered that one, it was pretty scary. And the calling out, he called out to the Proud Boys. And I have to say the combination of how poorly he answered the transition of power question and then calling out to the Proud Boys had me in a pretty bad place. It's just hard for me to remember it because that was a week ago, which is like 10 years in 2020 time.
Yeah.
Right. And like when the moderator did ask him to, condemn white supremacist groups, I think his response was, who do you want me to condemn? Christopher Wallace said specifically the Proud Boys, and Trump's response was, Proud Boys stand back and stand by. So in his one televised opportunity to condemn, hatred, and he gave it up. He couldn't bring himself to do it. And so this got me to thinking, okay, well, I've heard of these guys before, a time or two, but I don't follow a lot. I pay attention a bit to politics, but I'm pretty new on this political journey and everything like this. I had always, I don't know, I guess before I kind of hoped that racism and politics weren't combined, but I'm starting to realize that is not the case. So, from what I could figure out about these Proud Boys guys, the major founder is a guy named Gavin McInnes. And if you have anything to throw in here, jump in. But I got that he's a British-born Canadian writer and political commentator.
Yeah,
so,
one of the co-founders of Vice, actually.
Oh, Vice, right. So kind of just, not even really founded in America, but shit disturber and country hopper, I guess. But
I love the fact that I just typed the name Gavin into Google and he was the first autocomplete result.
First autocomplete result, and he's from Ottawa. He's Canadian. It's a Canadian product, so it's a real eye opener here too.
One of the most ridiculous people on the planet, actually. Like he's just so I don't understand how anybody took him seriously and started following any ideology that he might be professing. It's I guess we live in a world where Trump is the president of the United States, so I guess it's understandable, but
is it though?
How do you not take seriously a man who was in a band called Anal Chinook? I mean, that in itself should speak volumes.
Wow.
Eric, you probably haven't heard about Gavin McInnes. What did he do? Did he put a dildo up his ass on live TV to prove that he wasn't homophobic?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
Oh, you haven't heard about that either, Kevin? That happened like a year ago, and it was definitely one of those moments that's just like,
dear
what?
God.
What is happening?
Yeah.
Like, what is actually happening?
If I would... Yeah.
Yikes.
Yep. That was a real thing that he thought was a good idea, so... Definitely with Corey on just one of the most ridiculous people. Yep.
That is... I honestly can't believe I hadn't heard about that until now because...
I can't either.
That is absolutely massive, pun intended, and yikes.
Yeah, it was at least it was a year or two ago. Like it was in the Trump era, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was a while ago. Yeah. Yeah, and I have seen a lot of people talking about the Proud Boys and how they do have, like, a number of non-white members.
That's, their big claim.
One of the Proud Boys... Yeah, one of the Proud Boys is, like, Trump's campaign manager in, like, I don't remember. It was, like, Maine or some state on the East Coast that is not very populous. I think it was Maine or something. And that guy is Cuban. So they were like, look, they have prominent non-white members. And it's because technically the Proud Boys ideology is, well, they sum it up as West is best.
Western male chauvinism.
So it's all about, like, Western imperialism.
Yeah.
So, like, theoretically, non-white people can be big fans of Western imperialism if they want to be.
Oh, yeah.
But the systems
that's a
that
little
it's
thing
based
called
on.
tokenism, and it's specifically designed to make it look like you're not white supremacist, but all you're doing is you're using a person of color as a tool rather than a person. And so, you're not endowing them with personhood by saying, hey, look, here's this non-white person that's high up in our community. No, I'm sorry. Your espoused beliefs all support and reinforce the existing mantra of white supremacy that has been this country's, base idea, or, foundational ideology for coming up on 2.5 centuries, if not more. And, your one non-white person's not gonna forgive you for that.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like how, there's like people who are unabashed racists, right? And then there's people who think that they're not racist. Like things that my dad has said, like, I don't dislike black people. I just don't like when they act all gangster, or I don't like when they act all hood, right? Yeah. So it's like, what you're saying is, I think that white systems are the best systems, and, black culture is inferior. But I don't actually base it on the color of their skin. I mean, that's basically the step that the Proud Boys are as an organization. They're like, I'm not saying I'm great because my skin is white. I'm just saying all the things that white culture has done are the good things.
Right, right.
Exactly. Including the fact that for, going on 5+ centuries, white culture has been colonizing all over the world and stealing resources and enslaving people and treating non-white people as second and third class citizens. And I could go on and on and on about all the damage that colonialist imperialism has done over the past 5 centuries, that you saying the West is best is saying, oh, well, how we treated the entire rest of the world like shit. Yeah, that's best.
Right.
That's literally what you're saying.
They would argue that was like a net positive, and therefore it was worth it, or like that there was no better way to progress, which is just nonsense.
Utter bullshit.
Part of their ideology too is that there should be no such thing as white guilt, and I don't know. I don't know very many people who are calling for white guilt. I think the call out is for some awareness and some steps toward equality, right? So I don't think they're.
Although it maybe wouldn't hurt white people to feel a little guilty about.
Right.
Maybe, and a little bit of responsibility wouldn't hurt.
Well, believe it or not, I've gone through these emotions. I am at the end of the day, I am every bit as much white American as I am Canadian. Pretty much a 50-50 split of people forced onto reservations off of the farmland, and then the settlers that came there fresh off the boat from Norway to farmstead land. So. These are things I've dealt with over the years, and part of the reason why I'm looking forward to this, being able to talk about agriculture and indigenous rights and things like that. And maybe someday work towards some kind of collaboration. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, in my youth, my aunt and uncle live just a couple miles off of Red Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota. And I definitely had some very incorrect opinions when I was like a teenager. I mean, I went through a libertarian phase, so this is probably
we've all gone through that.
Pre-libertarian phase. But I definitely when you're driving, you can literally see, without knowing where the border of the reservation is, you can see the moment of where the border is, because the land changes from a cornfield. And where my aunt and uncle live is absolutely the middle of nowhere. They have to drive an hour to get to a grocery store. It's incredibly rural. My cousin graduated with a class of, I think it was 10 kids, and he had a 45-minute bus ride just to get to that school. So it's a very rural place for everyone, but you can see the land completely change from farmland to just sort of swampy, uninhabited land, and that's where the reservation starts. And when I was young, I thought that was a judgment on Native American people, that they didn't know what they were doing and that they didn't do a good job at, like, managing the land. And as I got older and got educated, I understood that we gave them the shitty land. Like, we picked that land and gave it to them because it was shitty. Like,
that was the whole point.
That's why the border is where the land changes, you know, because that's where we put them. That's where we made them go.
Absolutely. A lot of the reservations, reserves are unfarmable land. Sometimes, you know, ironically, lakes were included in there, you know.
Oh, yeah, there's a huge lake. Red Lake is like half of the Red Lake Reservation's land is actually just the lake.
So you can technically getting this square area, but how much of it is arable land, right? And then going further with that is the attempts at agriculture were a lot of times I don't know, sabotage, I guess you could say, with broken equipment, you know, rotting seeds, things like that. So, and then the history books, some that I even remember, you know, kind of suggested that the Native American attempt at agriculture wasn't successful because it, you know, wasn't in their nature. Or I can't remember how it was worded, but, you know, they definitely tend to glaze over these parts that.
I've spent some time in South Africa on farms, like visiting just through my connections. Because I have a rare breed of cattle, we make connections kind of globally because there's not that many of us. And they say the exact same thing about the native Africans.
Of course.
They just don't know how to farm. It's just not in their nature. They just don't know how to do it. And it's just, meanwhile, the people running their farms, because these are big farms, so these people don't milk their own cows. Do you know who's milking their cows? Black Africans are milking all of their cows, you know, but sure, they don't know what they're doing. You're just hiring them to do it.
Missionaries have a similar refrain when they go and they help a village in Africa dig a well, right? They'll say, oh, well, they just didn't figure it out. They just didn't know well enough. Meanwhile, if you just travel a ways, there's entire cities with, you know, like built like with the same technology as we have anywhere else. Like, the village you went to maybe didn't have what you thought they needed, but the fact is that these are complex civilizations, the same as any civilization. Like, it's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the only reason that I know, like, some of the things that I know about what we did to Native Americans is because one of my history teachers in high school, his first job that he took teaching was on Red Lake Reservation, and that made a big impression on him. So when he did his master's, he did it on some of those issues. And so when we got to the chapter in our textbook that was about Native Americans, he just told us to shut the textbook, and he just talked to us, like, very frankly, like, with his own information from his own, like, studies and experiences for, like, 2 weeks, instead of, he was just like, these textbooks are all bullshit. They're going to give you 3 paragraphs and it's not even scratching the surface of what we have done to these people. And he just went off the books, you know, and I wouldn't even know. And I still came out with some of those problematic attitudes that I didn't fix until college, you know?
So you were lucky enough to get some of the exact kind of teaching that Donald Trump is trying to eradicate from school systems and everywhere else.
Yeah, all that un-American anti-racism.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, doesn't that just remind you? I mean, that is just so, it's just so unbelievably fascist. It's just terrifying.
It absolutely is. And like when I start realizing, like, as I mentioned before, I'm fairly new to this whole, I'm, you know, realizing that I need to get more active politically. You know, my first thing is always nonviolence, right? That's kind of like what I'd like to see. But other than that, like, I'm just starting to align myself. We are lucky enough to have, you know, several political parties that we can kind of pick from that are valid here. So, you know, I'm kind of figuring all this stuff out. And I'm just going off on a tangent here, but one thing that was an eye-opener for me was growing up, you know, back and forth between the United States and Canada. I heard more of the, and I don't know if I'm ready to label myself a communist at this point, but I heard more anti-communist rhetoric as a kid, maybe than the average Canadian would. Because we had the nuclear silos, we had the Air Force Base flying the stealth bombers over and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of family members had gone off to Vietnam and things like this. So it was always, the commie this, fight the commie, and bad, bad, bad. One day I was riding a bus home from so I was taking, and I started talking to some kid about it. And he's like, "Have you ever read the Communist Manifesto?" And I said, "No, I certainly haven't." Probably in the back of my mind spat or something, whatever. And so he hands me this little pamphlet, and I'm like, wait a minute, I was expecting, a set of encyclopedias that he was trying to rook me into. Anyways, I read the little pamphlet, and I was taken aback because I did not disagree as much as I thought I would. The ways that people have gone about it and some of the things that have happened when these kind of revolutions happen maybe aren't the greatest, but anyways, that's my rant.
Yeah, I think the big set of tomes you were probably thinking of was his much more in-depth work called Capital, which is where he kind of breaks down his entire, the entire capitalist system and his philosophy and, his economic analyses and so on. But yeah, the Communist Manifesto was nothing more than the statement of beliefs for the German Communist Party back in the 1860s. So.
Yeah, I actually took a whole class on it when I was studying in the UK. One of my classes was 5 whole credits just on the Communist Manifesto. Nice. And I mean, my thoughts on it at that point were basically, this all sounds great, but do we actually have enough stuff? Do we have enough? Because if you don't actually have enough stuff for everybody, it kind of starts to fall apart, right? And that was just my sort of overall impression of it. Was it just this sounds awesome, but it sounds like a pipe dream to me. But we already kind of touched on that on our first episode of,
I think so. And who do you leave in charge of distribution?
There are various theories.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a lot of ways to go about distribution in a lot of people like the centralized planning idea. I would say I'm more of a decentralist and prefer, gift economy style distribution rather than, markets or central planning. But that's a tangent I'm sure I can get into another day.
Yeah, I mean, someday we could do a deep dive on it, but
yeah,
if we want to,
sure, yeah,
well, maybe it's something I'll write out and do a couple of segments on in a future episode.
Seems like an interesting idea.
Sure.
So we were kind of talking. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Corey.
I was just going to say, we were kind of talking about the ways that colonialism has taken away the rights of Native Canadians and Native Americans from their farming and whatnot. And when we were deciding on topics, Kevin had mentioned the issue out in Nova Scotia. I think it was Nova Scotia, right?
Yeah.
Where there's a tribe there or band of people that have native fishing rights, and because it was their home when colonizers came and took it, and there's a big debate going on there where there's some fishermen who are in the interests of major corporations that do the fishing in these areas they're getting pretty violent and pretty they're carrying out some pretty negative, awful shit against the natives in that area. I can't remember the name of the band. I'm sorry.
Don't remember the name of the band either. And of course, I'm going to weigh in on this one. But it's the Mi'kmaq from out there, Scotia, and I think the majority of it has to do with seasons. So from what I understand, they have maybe 5 or 7 boats, which is a small percentage of what they really have. But, and I'm not going to, take this whole time up, but the government's treaty rights have been given to us to hunt and fish for subsistence. And in the case of Nova Scotia for, quote, moderate living. Now, I don't know who's to define what a moderate living is,
that's an interesting
and all
thing.
this other stuff. But, I can get back to the hunting season stuff later on. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about it.
It's interesting that you said it was about corporations, because I definitely think that myself and maybe even the general public who don't dig into the issue are thinking it's like, okay, everybody needs to get their deer hunting license, and it's a bunch of people that go out, and why should First Nations people get special rights? But when you say it's corporations taking like a commercial catch, that's kind of a whole different issue.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that the courts ruled on it back when they said that it was supposed to be for a moderate living. Like, somebody in the court actively decided, well, we don't want First Nations people getting rich off of the fish. Like they actually,
right.
What?
We better throw that moderate thing in there so that it doesn't get and it's a shortening of the rights, basically, is what we're seeing. It used to be basically, I think it was unlimited fishing and hunting rights kind of thing. So I've enjoyed it as a kid growing up. I could always hunt fish all over Canada on public land. But here in Saskatchewan, what they've done is they've made it so that we have to follow the seasons as well. So we have to follow the regular season. And I think that's what the issue is in Nova Scotia. The other fishermen who, according to some reports, are bringing in 6-figure salaries out there, right? Who knows? But they're upset that natives are allowed to extend their fishing season. Into molting. But
that's an interesting thing too, because one of the podcasts I listened to had an expert on there who was talking about that, and they said there's actually not really such a thing as seasons in this. It's all arbitrary time frames that were made up just so that these commercial fishing organizations, they don't fish all the fish at once and then there's nothing there. Because something about the way that the fish breed and transport to that area makes it so that there's always new fish feeding into that area. But
interesting. Because like normal hunting seasons are usually based around the life cycle. Duck season is when the ducks are migrating, which is partially convenient for the hunters, but the same thing with deer season. It's always in the fall because you don't have like nursing babies that you're shooting the mothers, right? So, and it's also during the rut, which gets bucks up and moving and everybody moving around. But so the fishing seasons were just sort of put in there so that there would be a limit.
Yeah, sort of.
So I decided to do some quick reading up on it while we're talking here, and it looks like so the main thing is that the particular band, the name of which I'm going to completely butcher this, so I apologize in advance. Sepeknikatik is the First Nation, and it's part of the Micmac band of nations. Basically, they started their own self-regulated fishery and are handing out they have 250 licenses that they're handing out to indigenous fishers, and this is specifically for lobster fishing. So it's all about like lobster traps and whatnot.
Interesting.
And so each fishing license allows for 50 traps to be put up. Now, based on some numbers I saw on Twitter, the number of licenses is that the Department of Fishing and Oceans that the government of Canada gives out is in the tens of thousands, and the total number of traps allowed is in the hundreds of thousands. So this is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to that. The main reason the commercial fishermen are angry about this is that they think year-round fishing will somehow harm the fishing stocks in the ocean, which just like, okay, first of all, we're talking about the tiniest amount of harvesting. It's nowhere near what the commercial fishing industry in the area does. Besides that, as you guys were saying, seasons don't really make sense when you're talking about ocean fishing. Like it, you know, yeah, there might be some cold water, warm water things and affecting populations, and there are some migratory things. I don't think lobsters are among them. They're a bit slow to be massive migrators. No, I could be entirely wrong here. I'm not a marine biologist or anything of the sort. So, you know, feel free to connect or correct us in whatever way suits your fancy. But, you know, I don't seriously think that migration is that big of a concern. So, this tiny amount of lobster fishing during the off season is not going to affect anyone. And the fact that so many people are riled up about this makes me think that there has been a massive disinformation campaign going on specifically to disenfranchise this, this particular group of First Nation people from feeding themselves.
Right.
Like, that's literally what this is about. They want to
sell a little bit on the side.
And they want to be able to do that fishing. Yeah, like, and, you know, it's, like you said, there's already, things in place to prevent them from getting rich off lobster fishing, you know, even though that's apparently not a problem for all of these commercial fishermen, but, you know, they go through the government who stole the land and took it away and only gave it back to the First Nations people so they could barely feed themselves. And I think you see where I'm going with the, complete and utter just shit show of logical contradictions this whole situation is bringing up.
Well, you're absolutely right, Kevin. And if these guys, and I'm sure they are, if they're doing it according to, the native spiritual way of life, that harvest that they get is going to be going towards the elders first and then the rest of the community afterward, right? Whether it's in the form of money or I'm not sure if they're allowed to sell it or if it goes into the community or not, but it's not as though one guy is going to be going out there and, building himself a great big house by the lake or whatever while everybody else goes without. It's for the community, and these same people will, sit there talking about how, I wish these natives would just get jobs and stuff. But yet when we try to come up with these opportunities, they're taking our jobs or whatever, right? They're not playing. But it gets irritating hearing about all this hunting and fishing stuff because I am a hunter and I am a fisherman, and even the TV shows relating to hunting and fishing have been totally Columbus. I'm like, can we at least have one Native American fishing and hunting show? Like, you guys have to have them all. Like, anyways, not you guys personally, but
yeah,
that's never occurred to me before. But that's a great point.
Looking into like the regulation stuff, like, I think the main point of contention here is that the tribe is allowed to self-regulate its own fishing. It's not under the control of the DFO nation, like everyone else is. And I'm guessing that's probably, I'm guessing that's probably leading to the idea that, they're getting special treatment. And like, in a way they are, and in a way they're really not. They're not subject to the rules of a colonizing government.
You know what this reminds me of?
To be.
This reminds me of like when there's a pair of siblings and like one sibling is grounded and the other one isn't, and then they're like, why are you letting Tommy do whatever he wants? And it's like, because Tommy has been responsible with his actions, so we don't need to worry about him as much. He's not causing trouble. Like, I'm sorry that there are different rules for different people, but that's life. Like, there are reasons for it.
It's funny because they're complaining about it ruining the fishing stock out there specifically because if they were allowed to do it, that's exactly what would happen.
Exactly.
And like, you're complaining about it because you expect them to act in the same way that you're acting, and it completely ignores the fact that Native people have been tending this land, or had been tending this land, for, millennia before, European colonizers showed up and had been doing just fine with making it sustainable and not overfishing, because they weren't doing it just to make a profit. They were only fishing for what they needed and maybe a little extra for, various purposes that they could use. But like, they weren't trying to completely devastate the environment like you are. They know better. They have known better for centuries. And so stop ascribing your shitty actions to them when you are trying to argue against them being able to, utilize what should be their birthright, because this is where their people have been for way longer than any of you or your families have.
Mm-hmm.
Sad. And the colonial attitude towards North America has always been, what can I take?
Yep.
So how much lumber, how much, what's in it for me? Not really what's in it for the land, right? So.
Yep.
Right. Or just like what's in it for the community, or having like a long-term sort of generational outlook.
Yeah.
On
like you
things.
say, there's a distinct difference between the infinite growth necessary for capitalism and how much do we need to fish, or how many lobster do we need to take out of this to feed our community?
Right. Keeping people fed and content, I think, should be goals as humanity, really.
Agreed.
Not just getting rich. Imagine that.
Yeah. Right. At the very least fed, and at very best content, I guess. You can't keep people thrilled all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll awkwardly segue into the thing that I wanted to talk about tonight. So I said that the debate was like a horrible decision to watch, and that like Trump calling out to the Proud Boys and talking about how he wouldn't commit to leaving power peacefully really had me really upset. But I'm actually feeling a little bit hopeful these days, because Trump got his COVID-19 diagnosis, and he actually has it. And being that his health is a disaster and his age, there's a pretty good chance that this takes a decent toll on him. I mean, I know nothing terrible has happened yet, and personally, I'm not really rooting for him to die. I'm rooting for him to be, like, really sick, to the point that, like, the Republican Party sort of has to tear itself apart over whether or not he's still in charge. Okay. Like, that's what I'm hoping. Because, for his real Trump fanatics, as long as he's breathing, it's going to be seen as sort of a betrayal for him not to be in charge. But there's a point at which, if he's in a coma or something, somebody's going to have to do something, right? So it will be very interesting to watch them wring their hands over that if it gets to that point. But Trump is actually, his health is right now apparently doing quite well, right? Because the second he got sick, they took him to the hospital. I mean, they took him to Walter Reed Hospital, and they hit him with everything possible. Supplemental oxygen, experimental drug cocktails, everything possible. And it kind of hit me that, like, maybe he is going to come out of this just fine. Because...
It's a disappointing thought.
He's getting... It is, because to him that's just a validation of everything that he's been saying that's just been causing so much trouble, right? That's been hurting so many people and killing people, that this isn't really that big of a deal, right? So if he comes out the other end of this feeling fine, it's just going to validate everything he's been saying for everyone, for his followers, for himself. But what occurred to me was, they're basically hitting him with everything, no holds barred. No cost is too great. No timeline is too short. Like, they're going to do everything they can. They're going to hit him with everything, right? And this is something that's bothered me a lot, even when I'm listening to people who I respect a lot and who I think are fairly left-leaning in their politics, people who I think are good humanists, right? Sometimes there'll be discussions about healthcare and advances in healthcare, and they'll say, like a classic example is like a new cancer screening tool, right? And they'll say, well, this screening tool only catches 5% more cases of cancer than the old screening tool. So the cost doesn't justify it. We're not going to do it. And that always struck me as like kind of messed up. Cause like, what, like 5%, that's still 5% of people that are going to get their cancer diagnosed early and have a better shot at life. Yeah. So I have a whole herd of cows, right? And obviously different cows have a different level of value to me. And especially with cows, I often make medical decisions based on costs, like very stringent decisions based on cost, right? But I have this cow, Siren, and she's like the best thing that I've done in 20 years of work. Creating Siren is the best, the pinnacle of my achievements, right? And so when she got sick this summer, like I pull out all the stops, right? Like we're going to do pretty much anything I can do for her, right? Which is very different than how I treat a different cow in my herd, perhaps, right? And we did a lot of shit for Siren, and she pulled through 3 life-threatening health issues in the same month. And she's fine. She came out the other side fine. Totally blew my vet's mind. I mean, he thought she was a goner for sure, right? Because a lot of people wouldn't even give her this many chances, you know? And it's like, these are people. Why are we treating them like my shitty cows? We should be treating them like I treated Siren, like they're people, you know? Like,
yep.
If there's, and like, I don't quite understand, like I do hear people talk about like with a cancer screening, for example, they'll say there's, it doesn't do much better than the old screening, and you're going to get this many more false positives, and having to worry about, you know, that's one of the reasons they don't like to like screen people under the age of 40 if they're not high risk for, say, colon cancer, right? Because the risk of false positives they feel is too high of a risk for like the emotional like trauma that it puts people through to have a bunch of false positives all the time. But when and like I understand that that's sort of a cost benefit you have to make with some of these healthcare interventions, right? But I don't understand when it's literally just about financial cost benefit. Like, these insurance companies exist to absorb that cost for us. That's the point of them, right? If the medical organizations were like, this is the best cancer screening we have, this is the cancer screening we do. I mean, sorry, insurance companies, it costs more, but it's better. This is a cancer screening we do because we're doctors and we're supposed to save people's lives, right? So if Trump comes through this really well, most likely because he got all these early interventions, like nobody in any country, because even countries that we think do a better job with healthcare, like European countries, are still doing this financial calculus, right? Like, nobody has access to the kind of care that Trump did. Nobody was going to get supplemental oxygen until their oxygen got below a certain level. Right, Trump gets supplemental oxygen the second he takes a heavy breath, right? Like, doctors, medical organizations put up these standards of care, right? And that's like, this is the rules that you follow, and if you do anything outside of that, you're at risk of getting sued, because this is, as a group, what we've decided is the best way to proceed. Like, if you see this, you administer this treatment. If you see this, you administer this treatment. And that's not what Trump is getting. So, like, why don't all humans' lives matter as much?
Yep.
Right? And it's...
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And
it's really depressing to think that he could come through this just fine because he's getting this. And then what does that mean for how many people we could have saved if we weren't just pinching pennies like assholes?
Yeah. And like, this is something I've been talking about for a while, which is the reason that so many people argue against concepts like Medicare for all and universal health care is because of the lovely little watchword of cost. And the problem there is the fact that medical care, along with a lot of other necessities, has become a commodity. Mm-hmm. It's not a thing that people need, and so we get it for them. It's a thing to make profit off of. And that's how it's been treated for a while. And, you know, the fact that, yeah, there are people, a lot of people who are working in the field who need to get paid, and, you know, people coming up with the various treatments and the cost to research and produce the medicines that we do. And I'm like, okay, a lot of that makes sense. Like, there are definitely costs involved, but at the same time, this is something that we literally need or we die. And so the fact that we are treating it as a profit-making endeavor instead of just doing the work because it needs to get done and taking care of the people who do the work for doing that work, it's absolutely ridiculous. We need to move away from this concept that necessities can be profited from. People should not be able to profit from selling food to hungry people. People should not be able to profit from renting housing to people who are houseless. And people should not be able to profit off the fact that people get sick and need care. Like, that is not a thing that we should be doing to make profit off the backs of the needs that everyone has. Like, this is not a special, oh, well, this one person needs this thing and, you know, they're wealthy enough to pay out the nose for it. No, this is, we need all of it. Every one of us needs food. Every one of us needs a place to live and to sleep. Every one of us needs care when we get sick, and we all get sick eventually. Unless you're a fucking ageless immortal who never ages and never has disease and you can heal any injury within a few days, you're gonna need medical care at some point in your life. You needed it when you came into this world, you're gonna need it on the way out, and there's no exceptions to that I'm aware of. And so the fact that we are making a business out of this, the fact that we are making this a profit-seeking endeavor, and that we don't give care to people, the necessary care that they need, because it won't make money for the people who are providing that, is just...
Well...
It angers me so much. Sometimes I am absolutely speechless and just cannot describe how pissed off I am that this is the system we live in.
Well, I think that people, so sort of like we talked about, I think in the first episode, that like people who are sort of, people who believe this, and I don't, you know, some of them it's because it's like a real ideology for them, and some of them just because they haven't thought about it very much. But they think that like this cancer test costs so much, because that's the costs that went into the cancer test. Because they're...
Yeah, right.
Right, because they're assuming that, like, people are not... Like, they're just not thinking about it. They're thinking... And I think that they think that the more sort of pure it gets, the more commodified it gets, right? Because, like, commodification is, like, the end point of capitalism, right? Like, that's where all of agriculture is, right? It's... When you can commodify something, people think that you're getting even closer to the real value of that thing, right? And you're not. You're getting even further from the real value of that thing. The milk in my bulk tank outside was worth $17 per 100 pounds of milk this week. It was worth $20 3 months ago, and it was worth $13 3 months before that. It wasn't. None of those were real values.
I'm going to veer us into a quick economic history lesson here. So, the first known economic bubble was the Dutch tulip bubble. It was sometime in the 1600s. I don't remember all of the details because I'm literally remembering this from a Planet Money episode I listened to years ago.
Yeah, I think I heard the same one, but I don't remember much.
Yeah, so... Essentially, commodities are based on contracts. Contracts, and Del, if I'm out of my place on this at any point, please interrupt me. But as I understand it, the contracts are party A agrees to buy this commodity or X amount of this commodity for this price in, say, 3 months. So they're making an agreement with the farmer or the grower or whoever to say, I will buy, say, 2,000 bushels of wheat. And I don't know if wheat is measured in bushels or not.
Yeah, it is.
In 3 months for $5,000, let's say. And so what he can do is now he has this piece of paper that entitles him to that, to that quantity of wheat or that amount of time. And so when that contract comes up, he pays that amount and then he can do whatever. He can sell it on to a processor. Now, why wouldn't the wheat processor just buy directly from the farmer? Who knows? Maybe they need a middleman because they can't communicate easily or whatever.
Well, so a little bit, like, I'm too small to contract. Like, if I could contract, that would actually help me financially because I could at least do some predicting and sort of level out the highs and lows. The thing is that once you have a commodity, like wheat is wheat is wheat is wheat. I mean, that's not entirely true because there's different grades of wheat, but like hard red winter wheat is hard red winter wheat. And that is a commodity and that is traded on the Chicago Board of Trade. And so there are a bunch of contracts being set all the time. And if I have wheat to sell, I don't have to have a contract on that wheat to sell it. But if I go sell it, the person will look at the contracts, which are the Chicago Board of Trade is aggregating what those contracts are worth. If I go to sell that wheat tomorrow, they will look at what are the markets saying right now that wheat is worth, and that's what they'll pay me, right?
Yeah.
And if I go on Thursday and that price is different, even though it's the same wheat, so it's not necessarily that everyone who has the commodity has a contract. It's that these massive contracts moving back and forth are what tell you what you should pay me for my wheat at any given moment.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's exactly the way the stock market works, except you're dealing in, actual physical items as opposed to imaginary shares of ownership of a company.
Right.
But anyways,
it's really interesting in agriculture because like things were not always great when we were, focusing on the Chicago Board of Trade, and this whole commodity situation wasn't always great, but things got completely batshit insane when they started allowing speculators. So you no longer have to own wheat to make a contract to sell wheat. You can just trade it in the imaginary way that you trade stock shares now. And because it's just like the stock market where someone's feelings on any given day can make them engage in behaviors like, I heard a bad weather report. I think that's going to be bad for the wheat harvest. I'm going to go sell all my wheat contracts, right? And so then it does all this moving around, but it just got really, really exaggerated when they allowed people to literally commodify the shares of the commodity. They like double commodified it, right?
Yeah. And
now it's just
this is
wild.
This is what I was talking about with the Dutch tulip situation was essentially you had a contract, and so what they did was instead of selling the tulips, they sold the contract. Yeah. And so now you have a party selling a commodity that they do not possess, but they have a piece of paper that says they possess it or that they will possess it in some time. And so what they realized they could do is say, well, I have this contract for this stuff that says it's got to be paid this amount. Well, I could just sell it for a little bit higher, and then I can get I get to keep the difference. But what ends up happening is that you end up getting a lot of these people who all think that they can make money off this trading hands of paper, and they can, make a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And this is how economic bubbles start, because eventually you get to a point where everyone thinks they can do this. And obviously everyone can't. It's literally impossible. Someone's got to pay for the tulips eventually. Someone's got to actually, lose money on the deal because the amount they spent on the contract is less than the money they will be able to get from the actual tulips. And so there was a very particular period in history where this was happening, and it just exploded to the point that the price of a single tulip was higher than that of a standard family house. Literally, a flower was in, speculative economics terms, air quotes, worth more than a place people live. And that is the danger of speculation, and that is the danger of commodifying things. Now, there are definitely arguments for commodification. As Del was saying, it can help stabilize prices, because then you're working on a massive market where, everyone is, considered to be on roughly equal footing, and everyone's paying roughly the same price for the same thing. But as soon as you allow speculators in, as soon as you allow people to sell imaginary property for real value, then you are just asking for explosions and crashes and all of the things that come with the idea that you can pay for a thing that doesn't actually exist.
Right. Well,
it's literally you're trading properties on a monopoly board. It's just as real.
Well,
right.
How many people
so,
must make money off your milk, Del? Like you said, $17 per 100 pounds. I definitely do not pay that much at the grocery store. So by the time it gets to us, from farm to market, so many hands have dipped into it that, it's us that suffer. It's the farmer and the market person. So it would seem.
Yeah. And just to do some quick mental math, a gallon of milk weighs a little over 8 pounds.
8.6.
So if it's 8.6 pounds. So yeah, if we divided that, that's about, you get a little under 13 gallons, or no, it'd be a little over 12 gallons per 100 pounds. Imagine paying $17 to get 12 gallons of milk. That would be insanely cheap. So the amount of money that goes into, this whole process, including all of the speculating and all of the trading, and then you get into the milk processors and the milk bottlers and the shipping to the store and all that. And, so the amount of the actual product skyrockets, and the farmer sees a tiny, tiny fraction of that. Right. And so, yeah, it's just ridiculous that this is able to happen in a way that is so far beyond, outside their control. The people at the Chicago Exchange have more control over your local milk prices than the farmer who actually did the work of feeding and taking care of the cow and getting it out of them.
Well, and I'm padlocked to that. Like, there is not a way, absent of spending several $100,000, there is not a way for me to sell my milk for more. Like, there is no way. Commodity systems sort of lock you in, right? Like, there is no way for me to show anyone that my milk is, say, better or worse. So, like, when I'm selling a cow, like an actual live cow that I'm going to sell to somebody else to, like, milk in their herd, one of the ways that I figure out how much I can charge for that cow is I'll look at the local auctions, right? There's an auction like at least every month in different parts of the state. And so I can kind of say, like, okay, looks like the average cow is going for about $1,200. The highest cow of the day went for $1,500. The lowest cow of the day went for $900. And I know my cows are a little above average. So I'm going to see if I can get $1,300, $1,400 for my cow, right? When I'm trying to sell to this guy who stopped by my farm. And that's that's a reasonable level of commodification, right? It gives you a price that you can sort of find reasonable, that you can sort of peg yourself to, and you and the guy that you're talking to, if I say $1,400 and he says no way, and he says $1,100, right? I can say, look at this, look at the auction up here. Springers are going for $1,200. You're not going to get $1,100 for my Springers, right? But milk, because they commodified the commodity by allowing speculation, I can't differentiate myself. I can't sell it at any other price than their price. And their price is so disconnected from reality. They've literally made making food for people worse than playing the lottery, right? Like, they've made it that level of unpredictable chance. Yeah. And that's just gross, isn't it? I mean, we all need to eat. Yeah. Why would you, force people into this horribly risky, unpredictable scenario just so that people can have fun playing with the stock market, I guess?
And it seems to all go back to privatizing basic human rights, you know, and I guess a lot of it depends on what is considered a basic human right. Is access to medicine, is, you know, access to clean water, is access to what next, breathable air, you know, what are human rights, what are we willing to sell, and so on, and all I got.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are all really good questions, and, you know, there are going to be a lot of opinions on them, and a lot of them are going to be based on, you know, some pretty basic questions of ethics of, you know, how do we value life and how do we value the things that human lives need to continue living? You know, but I'm of the mind that says, you know, the things that we all need should be available to all of us. We're certainly well beyond the point that we need to worry about things like scarcity and a lot of this stuff. You know, even if maybe one particular thing is scarce right now, we have the resources to fix that with relative ease and to, you know, to make those things that might be scarce easily and quickly available to anyone who might need them. So the fact that we are still relying on this archaic system of the invisible hand of the market to determine whether or not you get to eat tomorrow is absolutely insane. And the fact that we are forcing not only people who make the food or people who can't get to the food, but also people who make the food into relative poverty because they can't make money supplying this need because of the way the market has determined, the smaller farmers who don't have the benefits of scale, well, they can't, they can't take advantage of that. And so they're making, they're barely breaking even, if that. I can't imagine how many farmers are in massive debt. I know in India, farming debt is a huge problem to the point where farmer suicide is at a massive level because of how much debt they're put in. It's actually
it's a really bad rate in the USA too. The farmer suicide rate is really bad.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. Like, it's, we're fucking over the people who are growing our food to the point where only the gigantic corporations can make it cost effective. And we wonder why, why people can't get the food they need. It's because we have commodified everything to the point where your ability to pay for something has become your ability to survive.
Well, and like even the big farms, like the actual farms producing the food, like they're more flexible, like they can ride out more waves, but like they're not making the profits. Like the actual people farming, even if they're really big, they're just absorbing more waves because they have more capital, right? So they can put it up against the bank, and they get kind of in a too big to fail situation. So the bank will float them a lot longer in a lot of cases. It's somewhere in between that things are getting messed up. It's even the big farms. The reason they get big is because you get big or you die. It's not really helping them. It's barely helping them continue to make ends meet.
Just the discrepancy, like in my layman's mind, I guess, as far as economics and agriculture go. I was listening to NPR, and they were just basically interviewing people. I think it was a Prairie something or other. And they went from interviewing a guy, I can't remember if he was cattle or crop, but basically his problem was that he was unable to sell it, and he was worried that it was going to go bad and be thrown out. Or whatever, it wasn't going to be able to be put on the market. The very next switch over, they switched to like Prairie Native News or whatever. And in that episode, they were talking about how these students at this native college in South Dakota, I think, had a food insecurity survey. And I think like 60% had experienced it in the past 30 days. So literally, like almost in the same breath of this radio commentator, we have this guy has to let all this meat rot or all this grain rot or whatever whatever, and a truck drive away, this entire population is going without meat or grain or whatever. The bureaucratic red tape that dictates that we have to live this, I think, is not in anybody's benefit whatsoever.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, so that was my rant for the day, which brought us in a lot of directions, but I just don't understand how when people are talking about healthcare in terms of cost like that they don't stop and think about it and go, hey, this is kind of fucked up. Like, you know, I don't feel great about the fact that when I have to like butcher a cow instead of spending $500 on veterinary treatment, like I don't feel great about that, but I also understand that that's what happens when you own cows that are going to get eaten. You know what I mean? Like you make those decisions, right? And if I were rich, I would make fewer of those decisions sometimes. But like, we're talking about people. Like, how does the average regular old compassionate-ish person not talk that way and realize how fucked up that is, you know? And you just can't convince me that I think a lot of people think that just like the economics of capitalism that we're operating under are somewhat logical or helpful and that the dollar figures on stuff, you know, mean something. And and you can't tell me now that I, you know, run a whole farm where I make food that people can't live without. I mean, people could live without milk and beef, obviously, but like food in general, like there is nothing more valuable than something people can't live without.
And yet you're not getting paid $1 million a day.
Right. Or even just a sustainable, good living wage. That's all most people want, I think.
Yeah, but you ask any, you know, neoliberal about this and they'll give you shit like, oh, supply and demand. Oh, the market has to do this stuff or else it's tyranny because we have people setting prices and they're, you know, they're unaccountable. It's like, the people setting the prices are already unaccountable. It's just a little bit more distributed and a lot more unfair since
and I don't believe the bullshit that it's actually based on supply and demand either.
Yeah,
it's
like you
based
said, it's
on
speculation.
Some rich stock traders' feelings, you know?
Yep.
It's not based on supply and demand. Even if you look at like, I don't know, some hot brand of yoga pants that people can charge $100 for instead of $50 for. That's not supply and demand. That's just human emotions of what they'll pay for shit. Like that's not supply and demand.
No, it's not.
Don't even get me started on fashion, you know. Kind of a useless industry as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And I mean, as far as the healthcare thing, I mean, I know what it's like to be in that situation where, working, not making a horrible wage, not paying rent and this and that, but at the end of the month, I was left with a decision, and if I'm repeating myself, stop me, but I'm left with this decision of, okay, I have enough for 2 bills. One of them, you know, the 3 bills I need to pay are medical insurance, heat, and groceries. I know I'm going to be cold. I know I'm going to get hungry. I may get sick, right? So which one are you going to leave out? And, you know, having to come up with that versus having to pay an extra 25 cents for a chocolate bar or a little more off my income that I take home it's a lot better system because I don't have to worry about coming up with a lump sum at the end of every month on top of everything else that is required just to basically exist in this economy, right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
But there's hope because we have people like our college or our high school alumni, I believe, Corey.
Yeah, that's right.
Tommy Douglas, right? Wasn't he from Weyburn? Basically the godfather of North American public health care, really. Was from here in Saskatchewan. And it's just a really, I was kind of reading up on it just by accident. And this is a thing I'm going to talk about for a little bit here. Just kind of accidentally found out how much of a political powerhouse Saskatchewan was at one time. The Tommy Douglas thing being from Weyburn, I had no idea. But it was during I think around 1918 or so. I was reading this little plaque. It was absolutely fascinating plaque, and the whole kind of string of events just got me thinking about women's rights, matriarchal societies and things like that. What it was this plaque, like a point of interest, and it was about this place just south of Moose Jaw where I live called Old Wives Lake. And basically how the story goes is that I am a member of the Cree First Nation. And historically, there's been kind of boundaries with the Blackfoot. So depending on who you hear this story from, and like a Blackfoot person might tell it different. But anyways, the Cree camp was at this lake, and there was the whole camp, like the whole families and everything. So they weren't as mobile as a Blackfoot war party that had come by. And they were on disputed hunting grounds. So anyways, basically, the Blackfoot were ready to attack the next morning. And the grandmothers of the community said, hey, here's what we'll do. We've lived basically full lives. You guys, what we're going to do is we're going to each light, like 3 or 4 fires so that we look like we're all here in the nighttime. Meanwhile, you guys are going to run away and escape. And then when the Blackfoot come in the morning, all they're going to find is us old ladies. So that's exactly what they did. And this war party came, and we're totally dismayed that all the warriors and horses and everything were gone. And these ladies there, and the ladies laughed at them basically as they were being killed, right? So I'm just like, wow, is that story ever metal, right? Like, it's just like these women were just so bold and so powerful and so fearless and so community. So that happened, and it was historically called Old Wives Lake. Settlement comes, they decide that story isn't cool enough, so it's Johnston Lake for the farmer. And nothing against farmer and all that, farm stock myself, but so anyways, where was I? Oh, okay, yeah, the women who I would like to feel were emboldened by the story of Old Wives Lake. Ida McNeil and another lady, it'll come to me, I'll put it in the notes this time. They fought heavily for women's suffrage out of this tiny little town in like nowhere in Saskatchewan in 1918. And they were absolutely crucial in us becoming the second province, which the first, I'm not sure, probably Ontario, to allow women to be recognized as citizens, as people, and to be able to vote and things. And, these women of that Mossbank area were directly responsible for getting, I mentioned the suffragette movement going, but as well as getting Tommy Douglas where he was, of universal health care and all this stuff. So I'm just like, I'm really blown away the more I learn and how I could be using the term wrong, but how democratically socialist Saskatchewan was at one time, basically the whole prairies, because we realized, I think, how volatile the conditions we have are, that nothing's guaranteed.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's awesome.
That's my universal healthcare thing.
That's a great story.
Well, I want to learn more about. That is
a really great story.
Hopefully, learn a bit more about Tommy.
Sure, that sounds like a great.
Love to hear about it.
Yeah, I'm very uneducated about Canada and Canadian politics, so.
Well, really, I think they made us learn.
I don't know.
They made us learn all this.
I don't know why this popped into my head just now. It has nothing to do with anything we've been talking about, but I found out that in Tallahassee, there is a baseball team, and apparently every game, there's this like big group of fans that like attends the games, and they're super fanatic about it. And what they do during the game is they wave the Canadian flag and sing "O Canada" for an American baseball team in Florida. It's absolutely wild. Apparently the story is something like back in the early 1900s, or maybe it's the 1940s. I don't remember. But anyways, there was a game going on, and "O Canada" for some reason was in the like popular consciousness at the time. It was popular for some reason. And so they were like, people were trying to come up with songs to sing for the team, and someone ended up singing "O Canada," and people joined along because they happened to know it at the time. And this team went from being, several points down to end up winning the game in,
so it was their
in
good
one of the
luck
late
charm.
innings. Yeah, and so it turned into a giant luck charm and has become this long-standing tradition since. And apparently, it's a college baseball team, I think, and like the college's colors are red and gold, so it's not too far off from the red and white of the Canadian flag. And so for some reason, when one of you said Canada, it just popped that into my head, and it was a fun little thing that I had heard earlier this week. And so yeah, cool little tidbit.
That is really random.
Depending on who you talk to,
Yep.
we'd rather be known for that than burning down the White House. But hey, we'll take credit for either one.
I also happen to know of a Canadian comedy band named Three Dead Trolls in a Baggie who did a song all about the fact that Canadians burned down the White House in 1812. So,
Matter of pride to some. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, we've
good.
had a nice long chat here tonight, I guess. So
indeed.
wrap it up until next time. It was fun, cathartic,
So,
learned some things.
yeah, indeed.
It was, and hopefully we don't have any more shit symphonies like that debate to report. Sometimes no news is good news, right?
So much
Well,
can
we'll
happen
see
in
about
2
that.
weeks.
Yeah,
Who
right.
knows?
Yeah.
A startling
Who knows
amount can
in 2
happen in
weeks?
2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we have seen.
All right.
It was awesome to talk to you guys again.
Hey folks, it's Corey here. I just wanted to add this little bit at the end to apologize for the lateness of the episode. There was some trouble with getting everything lined up and getting all the files and getting everything mixed, and then, life. A couple things, because this is late. Donald Trump was released from the hospital on Monday. It's now Friday when I'm releasing this episode, so it's going to be like he's been out for a week. He's said a lot of ridiculous, of course, insane stuff. Yeah, like he said a lot of wild shit. And on top of that, we have like the vice presidential debate was a couple nights, last night or the night before, something like that. And so there was a lot of stuff going on with that. It turns out that Mike Pence is just as full of shit as Donald Trump, and not as credible as people think he is. The only thing that's different might be that he doesn't swear or he doesn't insult people. He is just as much of a liar. And I know that this is just an addendum, so I'm not going to keep going on that. There was also an update on the Micmac lobster boat, lobster fishing story. On October 5th, there was a lobster boat that belonged to a Micmac fisherman, and it was destroyed by a suspicious fire at a wharf in southwestern Nova Scotia, near waters where a self-regulated Indigenous fishery is underway. So there was some suspicion about that, because who knows? I mean, it seems like a lot of people there are getting quite violent over this, and I think it's worth being skeptical of and thinking critically about what's happening here. But anyway, I just wanted to give you a couple updates, let you know that I'm sorry for the lateness of the episode, and make sure to follow us on Twitter at SkeptarchyPod, Follow us on Facebook, Skeptarchy. If you want to share the show, our website is skeptarchy.com. We are now on 9 websites and our 9 podcast sites, as well as you can find our stuff on YouTube. All these episodes will be as videos, just with a static image, but that's what we're doing for now. And what else? You can find me at Hardcore Skeptic on Twitter, or Corey Johnston, CJ Brainstorm on Facebook. You can also find Del on Earth at more Cowbell, MOAR Cowbell, and you can find I think Kevin's is AncomSciCom on Twitter, and then Del is on Facebook as Del on Earth, and Kevin moderates the Facebook page that SJW the Nazis warned you about, and Eric is on Facebook as Eric Ray, or Eric Ray Standing, I believe. So that's that. Follow us, like the page, share the show. The more you enjoy it and share it around, the better it is for all of us. Thanks very much, and have a good one. What the hell?
Why are there two of you, Corey?
So it looks like Corey's first
there we go.
Google Meet cut out, and then he rejoined. So there we go.
Are you sure he didn't clone himself?
Right. More likely.
The whole
evil twin or the good
changed.
twin win?
Yeah, I was going to say, he would have had to clone the entire house, so.
You never know.
All right.
Split universe theory.
Somehow I screwed it up, but we're back.
We're back.
Alrighty.
Better shot at life.
Oh, we got dogs, guys. Sorry.
It's all right.
No worries. Sounds like they're just as mad about this as we are.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Well,
you were
and
at
so
5%, though.